Every day, whether you realize it or not, you're taking things into your body and your brain that are shaping who you are. I'm not just talking about food or drink. I'm talking about behaviors, information, thoughts, substances, emotions, relationships, things that hardwire your nervous system in ways you don't even notice. And over time, these inputs start to define the baseline of your performance, your resilience, and your identity. There are about 6 categories of input that most people are taking in regularly that are absolutely throttling their potential. You know what they are, even if you pretend not to. These are things that seem harmless in the moment, but are absolutely catastrophic over time. They numb you. They spike your dopamine temporarily and crash it long term. They weaken your ability to focus. They dysregulate your sleep, your motivation, your sense of meaning. And yet people take them in daily, on autopilot. Why? Because your brain craves predictability and instant gratification more than long-term fulfillment. Unless you train it otherwise, your nervous system is designed to be efficient, not optimal. So if you've trained it to seek comfort, distraction, validation, or avoidance, you will go back to those 6 things like a reflex, even if they're ruining you. And if you don't interrupt that loop, it becomes your identity. The truth is this: your brain is constantly changing. Neuroplasticity is real. That's not just a cool fact, it's a call to action. You can rewire your response to stress. You can build a new baseline of focus and energy, but only if you stop feeding the circuits that are pulling you downward. You don't need more hacks, more supplements, more content. You need to stop the 6 things that are quietly hijacking your system. There's no magical moment where it gets easy. The brain resists change at first, but after just a few days of clarity, the signal-to-noise ratio improves. Your internal systems, dopamine, cortisol, circadian rhythm, start recalibrating. And when that happens, the noise of craving gets replaced with the voice of clarity. You don't need motivation. You need to take inventory. Get radically honest. And ask, what am I taking in that's making me weaker, not stronger? And then stop. Not slowly, not eventually, immediately. Because the longer you delay, the deeper those patterns get wired. The harder it gets to crawl out. The hardest part is the start, but you're not broken. You're just misaligned. And when you stop taking in those 6 things, you create space for discipline, for energy, for purpose. That's when the real work begins. That's when your brain starts working for you again. That's when you stop surviving and start evolving. And that's the point. Self-awareness is the gateway to behavior change. It's not optional. It's foundational. Without it, we live on autopilot, driven by reflexes, habits, and emotional undercurrents we don't even recognize. You can't change what you're not aware of. In neuroscience, we often talk about the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and future planning. But here's the thing. That system doesn't activate well when you're not paying attention. If you go through your day consuming inputs, social media, processed food, reactive conversations, low-quality entertainment, without noticing how those things make you feel or how they shape your behavior, you're giving up control. You're letting your environment write the script for your life. Real change doesn't begin with action. It begins with observation. Self-awareness is about developing the skill to pause, to notice patterns, and to ask deeper questions. Why am I reaching for my phone the second I feel bored? Why do I scroll for an hour before bed even when I know it wrecks my sleep? Why do I keep returning to the same argument, the same distraction, the same excuse? These aren't surface-level behaviors. They're telling you something about your internal wiring, what your nervous system has learned to expect, to crave, and to avoid. The powerful thing about self-awareness is that it creates space. It inserts a moment of clarity between stimulus and response. Instead of reacting unconsciously, you begin to see options. That's where agency comes from. Your brain starts to register that discomfort is not danger. Boredom isn't a problem that needs instant stimulation, that you don't have to escape every difficult feeling. With enough repetition, that space widens. The circuits in your brain begin to favor thoughtful decisions over impulsive ones. This is not just philosophy. It's neurobiology. You're literally reshaping the way your brain processes experience. One of the reasons people stay stuck is because they outsource their awareness. They look for answers from other people, from apps, from surface-level productivity tips. But the work is internal. It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest. You have to notice what you're taking in and how it's shaping your thoughts, your energy, and your behavior. That means tracking not just what you do, but how it feels in your body, how it affects your mood, your focus, your clarity. Self-awareness isn't passive. It's active monitoring of your internal state. It's how you reclaim control over the systems that otherwise run on default. When you build this internal awareness, change becomes inevitable. You start to notice the cost of certain behaviors, not just intellectually, but somatically. You feel the fog after a dopamine binge. You sense the drop in motivation after avoiding a hard task. You begin to see clearly. Everything you take in carries a neurochemical consequence. And once you really see that, it becomes almost impossible to go back. Small, repeated exposures can rewire the brain. This isn't a metaphor. It's a measurable physical process. Your brain is made up of billions of neurons connected by synapses, and these connections are constantly being strengthened or weakened based on what you do, think, and experience. Every action you repeat, every thought you entertain, every emotion you allow to linger is essentially a training signal. Whether you're conscious of it or not, you're always practicing something. And whatever you practice, your brain gets better at. It doesn't care if what you're reinforcing is helpful or harmful. It just follows the patterns you give it. This is where most people misunderstand change. They assume transformation comes from a single big moment, some breakthrough, some resolution, some external motivation. But the brain doesn't work that way. It responds to consistency. Tiny actions done over and over create long-term structural changes in neural pathways. That's why habits are so powerful. When you repeat a behavior, even a subtle one like checking your phone when you're anxious or procrastinating when you're unsure, your brain encodes it as a preferred path. The more you repeat it, the easier it becomes. The behavior moves from being a conscious decision to an automatic reflex embedded in the architecture of your nervous system. This applies to everything. The way you respond to stress, how you talk to yourself, how you relate to discomfort, how you regulate your emotions. If you repeatedly avoid discomfort, you build a brain that is hypersensitive to challenge. If you repeatedly confront discomfort, even in small doses, you build resilience. That's how exposure works. It doesn't need to be massive or heroic. It just needs to be consistent. Consistent. Take cold exposure, for example. Not for the trend, but for the biology. When you expose your body to short bursts of cold, you're training your brain to handle stress. You're teaching your nervous system that discomfort is survivable. The same principle applies to mental stressors. When you lean into a difficult conversation, when you sit with an urge instead of acting on it, when you resist the pull of instant gratification, those are exposures too. Each one sends a message to your brain. This is the new normal. This is how people unknowingly build negative patterns too. If you keep exposing yourself to drama, noise, overstimulation, and passive consumption, you reinforce those as defaults. You train your brain to seek out chaos, to get restless in stillness, to crave the dopamine hit that comes from distraction. And over time, this affects more than just your habits. It shifts your baseline mood, your focus, your energy, your ability to delay gratification. These things don't collapse overnight. They erode slowly through repetition. Neuroplasticity doesn't care what direction you take. It will follow whatever path you feed it most often. That's the opportunity and the warning. The smallest repeated inputs shape the largest outcomes. A few minutes of mindfulness, a brief moment of discipline, a single decision to pause instead of react. These might seem insignificant, but neurologically, they are reps. Neuroplasticity works both ways. It's one of the most empowering and simultaneously humbling truths about the human brain. The same process that allows you to build better habits, learn new skills, and become more resilient can also entrench negative patterns, reinforce destructive behaviors, and make it harder to break free from cycles that no longer serve you. The brain is always adapting, always rewiring itself based on what you repeatedly do, think, and feel. This means your nervous system is constantly being shaped, either by your conscious choices or by your unconscious habits. Every thought you entertain, every emotion you dwell in, every behavior you repeat is like a vote cast for the person you are becoming neurologically. Neurons that fire together wire together. That's the basis of Hebbian learning, one of the core principles of neuroplasticity. The more you run a particular circuit, be it anxiety, discipline, anger, compassion, procrastination, or focus, the stronger it gets. Your brain doesn't distinguish between good or bad, helpful or harmful. It only registers repetition and intensity. So if you continuously feed it with negative self-talk, reactive behavior, or mindless distraction, you're literally hardwiring those responses into your baseline. Over time, they become default patterns, ones that feel automatic not because they're your true self, but because your brain has practiced them into familiarity. The same principle, though, gives you the power to change. The very fact that you can wire in unhelpful circuits means you can also unwire them and create new, more aligned ones. But it requires awareness, intention, and consistent effort. If you want to become more focused, you have to train focus. Focus. If you want to be more disciplined, you have to consistently choose discipline, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. And if you want to be less reactive, you have to practice stillness, reflection, and self-regulation in moments where it would be easier to lash out. Each time you do this, even imperfectly, you're weakening old pathways and strengthening new ones. It's important to understand that breaking an old pattern is not about deleting it from your brain. Those circuits don't disappear, they just become less dominant. Think of it like carving a new trail through a forest. The old path is still there, but the more you walk the new one, the clearer and more automatic it becomes. Your brain will always favor the most efficient route, so the more you reinforce the new pathway, the more it becomes your default. That's the beauty of plasticity. It bends in the direction you push it. But because it works both ways, passivity is also a choice. Every time you delay action, avoid discomfort, or fall back into mindless habits, you're not just standing still, you're reinforcing the path you wish you could escape. There is no neutral in this process. Your brain is always learning, always adapting, always recording what you prioritize. Stress, dopamine, and addiction loops are deeply interconnected in ways most people don't fully understand. At the surface level, stress feels like pressure or overwhelm, dopamine feels like pleasure or motivation, and addiction seems like an issue of willpower. But on a neurological level, these elements form a powerful cycle that can trap the brain into repeated behaviors, especially ones that feel good in the short term but are damaging over time. It starts with stress, whether it's emotional, physical, or environmental. When the brain detects a threat or challenge, it activates the stress response system, heart rate increases, cortisol is released, and attention becomes narrowed. This response is not inherently bad. In fact, it's adaptive and can help you respond to challenges with clarity and energy. But when stress becomes chronic or unregulated, it creates vulnerability in the reward system. This is where dopamine comes in. Dopamine isn't just the pleasure chemical. It's more accurately described as the molecule of motivation and anticipation. It spikes when you're pursuing something, not just when you get it. Under stress, the brain begins to crave quick hits of dopamine as a way to regain control or escape discomfort. That's when you find yourself reaching for your phone, junk food, alcohol, or any number of instant gratification behaviors. These actions temporarily elevate dopamine levels, giving you a brief sense of relief or reward. But the catch is that artificial spikes in dopamine are always followed by a crash, a drop below baseline, and in that crash, the discomfort returns, often worse than before. This drop creates a craving for another dopamine spike, pulling you back toward the same behaviors. Over time, the brain adapts to these patterns. It starts to require more stimulation to achieve the same level of pleasure or relief. This is called tolerance. What's tolerance? Simultaneously, the natural sources of satisfaction, real achievement, connection, rest, begin to feel less rewarding. The brain becomes wired to seek out intensity over meaning, novelty over depth. This is the addiction loop. It's not just about substances. It can be social media, binge watching, excessive shopping, or even overworking. The common thread is that these behaviors offer immediate dopamine in response to stress, followed by a crash that leads to more craving. Over time, the loop becomes automatic. The brain starts to associate stress not with problem-solving or resilience, but with escape. And that escape reinforces the loop. The frontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for self-control and long-term thinking, starts to lose influence, while the limbic system, associated with emotion and impulse, gains dominance. This makes breaking the cycle harder, not because you're weak, but because your brain has been trained into a pattern that prioritizes short-term relief over long-term well-being. The key to interrupting the loop is recognizing how stress and dopamine interact. It's not just about removing the addictive behavior. It's about learning how to regulate stress in ways that don't hijack your reward system. You can choose discomfort now or dysfunction later. That's the trade-off that exists in nearly every decision you make, whether you're conscious of it or not. The brain is wired to avoid pain and seek comfort, and this survival mechanism served us well for most of human history. But in the modern world, comfort is cheap, instant, and everywhere. You can escape boredom with a scroll, numb anxiety with a drink, silence uncertainty with distractions. These choices feel harmless in the moment, even necessary, but each time you opt for immediate relief, you reinforce a pattern of avoidance, and that avoidance accumulates into long-term dysfunction, physically, mentally, emotionally. Discomfort, on the other hand, is where growth happens. Not the kind of discomfort that overwhelms your system or causes trauma, but the kind that signals effort, honesty, and resistance. Waking up early to train when you'd rather sleep, saying no to something easy so you can say yes to something hard, sitting with an emotion instead of fleeing from it, making the uncomfortable decision to speak up, to stay disciplined, to hold yourself accountable. These moments don't feel good, and they're not supposed to. They're a signal that you're pushing your edge. And each time you lean into that edge, you strengthen the parts of your brain responsible for self-regulation, focus, and long-term thinking. Neuroscience shows us that the prefrontal cortex, your executive function center, gets stronger with use. The more you activate it through difficult but meaningful actions, the more influence it gains over impulsive behaviors. But if you avoid discomfort consistently, that region weakens. Your default mode shifts to reactivity, procrastination, and anxiety. That's when dysfunction begins to settle in. Poor sleep, poor focus, mood swings, addictive behaviors, emotional instability. They don't usually start from one catastrophic moment. They build from small decisions made over time to sidestep discomfort. And the longer you delay facing those moments head on, the more your nervous system adapts to dysfunction as normal. Choosing discomfort isn't about suffering for the sake of it. It's about accepting that real change, real clarity, and real strength come with effort. Nothing meaningful is built in the absence of challenge. You don't become mentally resilient without facing stress and staying grounded. You don't build discipline without resisting temptation. You don't grow emotionally by avoiding every difficult feeling. The willingness to do the hard thing now is what protects you from the slow erosion of your potential. It's a kind of internal contract, short-term discomfort in exchange for long-term freedom. And that contract applies everywhere. In your health, your relationships, your work, your sense of purpose. You can either feel the sharp sting of discipline today or the dull ache of regret tomorrow. One is intense but temporary. The other is subtle but chronic. Over time, avoiding discomfort doesn't just keep you stuck, it reshapes your identity around avoidance. And once that identity is in place, it becomes harder to change, not because change is impossible, but because you practice comfort so consistently that discomfort feels foreign. The truth is, every decision you make is a vote for the person you are becoming. If you keep choosing ease, escape, and short-term relief, you are training your brain to expect less from life and from yourself. But if you choose discomfort with intention, even in small, quiet moments, you are building a system that thrives under challenge, a mind that sharpens under pressure, and a life that reflects strength instead of survival. You will never escape the cost. You either pay with effort now or with consequences later. Choose the pain that leads to power, not the comfort that leads to decay.